Balenciaga. How an avant-garde brand became a symbol of uncanny luxury. Luxury, as most people understand it, is meant to please, to be beautiful, desirable, easy to recognize. But what if true luxury didn't want to be understood? What if, instead of enchanting, it deliberately intended to cause discomfort? Balenciaga built its empire precisely on this paradox. The stranger it seemed, the more powerful it became. And this shatters a deep-seated belief about status, success, and social validation. There comes a point in life when a person realizes that trying to please everyone is a losing game. Interestingly, it's precisely at this point that they begin to gain more respect. Balenciaga did this on a global scale. They taught us that modern luxury isn't about obvious beauty, but about controlling the narrative. Those who understand, understand. Those who don't, criticize, and end up spreading the word. What seemed like a mistake became a strategy. What seemed ugly became a symbol of social intelligence and silent power. Perhaps the most unsettling thing of all is realizing that the brand doesn't sell clothes, it sells permission. Permission not to fit in, to stand by strange choices, to maintain identity even under judgment. And when you understand that, you begin to see not only Balenciaga in a different light, but also your own decisions, your projects, and even your insecurities. Because deep down, this story was never just about fashion. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. The rise of Cristobal Balenciaga and the birth of the avant-garde. Cristobal Balenciaga didn't emerge as an ordinary designer. He appeared as someone who saw fashion almost as emotional architecture. While others followed trends, he preferred silence, method, and precision, like a craftsman who converses more with his scissors than with applause. They said he didn't design clothes. He designed wearable ideas. And, curiously, this detached posture created an aura of authority that few brands have managed to replicate. It wasn't haste, it was long-term vision. And whoever understood that, understood everything. At the height of Parisian haute couture, when luxury still needed to be beautiful to be accepted, Balenciaga decided to challenge the obvious. He ignored rules of proportion, softness, and even visual appeal, opting for unexpected volumes and structures that caused a sense of unease at first glance. It's like when someone reads a book that's too difficult for their current life situation. It's unsettling, but it plants something. Many clients didn't understand it immediately, but they felt there was a silent power there. And this elegant discomfort became his signature. What's most interesting is that Balenciaga never wanted to be understood quickly. He believed that true luxury doesn't ask for permission or explanation, only time. Just like investing years in the same project, even when no one applauds, he trusted that real impact matures away from the noise. Perhaps that's why his brand was born with a DNA so ahead of its time. And this almost invisible detail opens the way for something even more provocative that would come later: the aesthetic revolution of radical silhouettes. The brand Balenciaga, it began to cause strangeness precisely when it decided to tamper with what no one dared to: the body as a standard. While the fashion of the time sought to accentuate the waist, lengthen curves, and please the male gaze, the silhouettes created there did the opposite. They hid, amplified, and displaced. It was as if the clothing said, "I'm not here to beautify you. I'm here to liberate you." This was confusing, of course, but it also awakened a silent respect. Whoever wore it felt different, almost out of time. These radical forms functioned as an exercise in visual detachment. It wasn't about looking beautiful in the mirror, but about maintaining presence. Think of someone who enters a room without saying a word and yet changes the atmosphere. The clothing did that. Ample volumes, dropped shoulders, stiff fabrics creating distance between the body and the world. In practice, it was an invitation to abandon the need for immediate approval. Something similar happens when someone decides to invest in deep knowledge instead of seeking quick shortcuts. At first, no one understands, but the impact comes later. The curious thing is that this uncomfortable aesthetic taught a silent lesson about power. Those who depend on acceptance need to conform. Those who are convinced can allow themselves to be strange. And Balenciaga began to cultivate an audience that didn't want to please. It wanted to be different. This detail changes everything, because it's no longer about clothes, but about attitude towards life. And it is precisely there that the brand begins to prepare the ground for an unexpected void that would come soon after. The hiatus after his retirement, and the myth that remained. When the founder stepped down, there was no grand farewell or dramatic announcement. There was silence. And that silence weighed heavily. The brand remained suspended in time, like an impeccable yet empty house, where everything is in its place. But the soul of the people circulating through the corridors is missing. While other brands chased after trends, there was an almost religious respect for the past. No one wanted to make mistakes. No one dared to tamper too much. The result was a discreet, almost invisible presence, yet full of reverence. This period teaches something powerful. Not every pause is weakness, sometimes it's incubation. It's like a personal project that's shelved for years because there's not yet the maturity to move it forward. On the outside, it seems like stagnation. On the inside, time is organizing the pieces. The brand didn't die, it became a legend. And legends survive precisely because they don't over-explain. The name continued to circulate behind the scenes of fashion like a respectful whisper, one of those that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The most curious thing is that this creative void fueled desire. The less one saw, the more one imagined. The market began to project expectations onto what no longer existed, creating a silent tension. And all tension, sooner or later, demands resolution. It was inevitable that someone would try to rekindle this flame, but the question that lingered was, who would have the courage to touch a myth without shattering it? The modern reincarnation, from Nicolas Ghesquière to Demna Gvasalia. When the brand decided to break its silence, the choice of the first name was not random. Nicolas Ghesquière. He arrived as someone who understood the past without wanting to copy it. He brought technology, futuristic lines, and an almost scientific approach to dressing, like someone restoring a rare work of art using modern tools. It wasn't nostalgia, it was updating. Gradually, the Balenciaga name began to circulate with respect again, proving that tradition doesn't need to become a museum. It can become a laboratory. Years later, the turnaround became even bolder with Demna Gvasalia here. The logic changed completely. Instead of softening the strangeness, he decided to amplify it. He brought the everyday, the ugly, the banal, and the exaggerated to the center of luxury, almost like an uncomfortable mirror of society. It's like taking something common, a sweatshirt, a worn-out sneaker, and asking, what if this were power? Many people turned up their noses but couldn't stop looking. This transition reveals a lesson that goes beyond fashion. Reinventing yourself isn't about pleasing others, it's about sustaining your vision. Just like in personal or financial projects, there are times when evolving requires calculated risk and a strong stomach for criticism. The brand made it clear that it didn't just want to exist in the present, it wanted to provoke the future. And this provocation, increasingly explicit, would open space for its own language that would definitively change the luxury game. The birth of strange luxury as language. What began as a sense of strangeness turned into a language of its own. Balenciaga. It stopped simply creating clothes and began communicating ideas that deliberately provoked discomfort. Luxury, once associated with obvious beauty, now flirted with the bizarre, the disproportionate, and even the unaesthetic. And, curiously, this didn't alienate the right audience. It brought them closer. Those who understood this language didn't just understand fashion, they understood positioning. Dressing became a silent declaration of mental independence. This strange luxury functions as a psychological test. It separates those who need validation from those who uphold their identity. It's similar to someone choosing to read a difficult book, like Think and Grow Rich, while some seek quick answers in ready-made phrases. At first, it seems like an exaggeration. Later, it becomes a reference. The uncomfortable clothes, the oversized sneakers, the silhouette that challenges the mirror. All of this forces the wearer to take responsibility for their own choice. And that, ultimately, is power. From then on, the brand made it clear that it wasn't selling fabrics, but belonging to a minority that thinks differently. The product became a symbol, almost a secret code. Those who recognize it, recognize it. Those who don't, criticize it. And that's part of the game. This noise, far from being a problem, became fuel. Because the stranger it seemed, the more attention it generated. And attention, when well used, attracts external forces that amplify any message. The impact of pop culture and celebrities. When the language of weird luxury encountered pop culture, the effect was immediate and explosive. Figures such as Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. They didn't just wear the brand, they embodied the message. It wasn't about pretty clothes for photos. It was about presence, shock, and storytelling. Every public appearance functioned as a silent manifesto. This isn't to please you. And ironically, the more challenging it was, the more desirable it became. The logic here is simple, but not at all obvious. Celebrities don't sell products. They sell social permission. When an influential person stands by something unusual with conviction, the public understands that they can do the same. It's like when a respected leader invests years in the same project while everyone doubts it. Suddenly, that behavior becomes a benchmark. Balenciaga understood this early on and placed its pieces on the right bodies at strategic moments, transforming each look into news, debate, and, of course, desire. The most interesting thing is that this movement didn't need explanation. The image did the hard work. The clothes seemed wrong, the context was perfect, and the impact was inevitable. Thus, strange luxury left the catwalks and invaded the collective imagination, ceasing to be a niche market and becoming a global conversation. And when a brand dominates the conversation, it begins to realize that attention can be used in even bolder ways. The invisible strategy, when the product becomes a provocation. At a certain point, it became clear that the product was no longer the focus. It was the trigger. Destroyed sneakers, bags that resembled garbage bags, almost impractical glasses. None of this was accidental. It was strategy. When something seems too absurd to exist, it automatically becomes conversation. And conversation generates attention. Attention generates desire. It's the same principle as someone who launches an idea that initially causes strangeness, but keeps hammering in people's heads until it becomes an inevitable reference. The curious thing is that, behind the shock, there is precision. Nothing is improvised. Each piece provokes a silent question. Is this ridiculous or brilliant? And by the time someone needs to think to answer, they're already hooked. In practice, it's like investing in a project that seems wrong to an outsider, but makes sense to someone who knows the whole plan. The value isn't in the object itself, but in the story it activates. And well-told stories sell more than any logical argument. This strategy transforms criticism into fuel. The more people say, "This is absurd," the more the brand confirms that it is exactly where it wanted to be, outside the obvious. The product ceases to be clothing and becomes a symbol of intellectual audacity. Those who buy it also buy the courage to endure discomfort. And when the discomfort begins to touch on moral and social boundaries, the game levels up, and the risk increases dramatically. The scandal that almost destroyed the brand, and why it didn't. When the controversy crossed the line from provocative to moral, many believed it was the end. Campaigns pulled from the air, public apologies, partner brands distancing themselves. The scenario resembled those moments when an entire project seems to crumble overnight. To the outside public, it sounded like a fatal mistake. To those who understand symbolic power, it was a narrative crisis. And every crisis, when handled well, reveals more about a brand's strength than years of quiet success. What kept the structure standing wasn't persisting in error, but understanding the game of time. Strong brands don't survive because they are perfect, but because they know how to absorb impact. It's like someone who makes a big mistake in their personal or professional life, but has the maturity to pause, recalibrate, and move on. There was strategic silence, internal adjustments, and a clear attempt at repositioning. Not to please everyone, that would be impossible, but to avoid losing control of their own story. The key point is that the brand's audience was already accustomed to discomfort. A sense of estrangement was part of the emotional contract. The crisis, paradoxically, reinforced this. Those who stayed because of identity, not social approval. And when a base is built on extreme differentiation, it tends to be more resilient. Even so, after this episode, something changed in the consumer's perspective, and understanding who these people are has become essential to predicting their next move. The strange luxury consumer, who they are and what they really buy. The audience that connects with this type of luxury isn't buying traditional status. They're buying symbolic differentiation. It's not about looking rich. It's about looking inaccessible. These people in general have already moved beyond the phase of seeking approval and use clothing as an extension of their own identity. It's like someone who prefers to invest in long-term assets instead of flaunting quick gains. The value lies in what few understand. Wearing something strange, expensive, and conceptual requires inner security, not just money. Psychologically, this consumer seeks narrative control. They want to decide how they will be interpreted, even if it generates strangeness. There is a silent pleasure in causing doubt in others. In practice, this manifests itself in choices that deviate from the obvious. Oversized clothes, uncomfortable pieces, combinations that seem wrong. It's the same reasoning as someone who chooses to study a complex topic in depth, while most consume superficial content. The return is not immediate, but it is more lasting. What's most interesting is that these people aren't just buying products. They're buying a sense of belonging to a certain frontier. They see themselves as part of a group that sees ahead, understands ahead, and is willing to pay the price, both financial and social, for it. This behavior reveals something bigger about the luxury market itself and how it evolves as the world changes. And when this profile begins to solidify, an inevitable question arises. How far can we go without losing our impact? The future of Balenciaga and the paradox it has created. After going so far in its bizarreness, the brand began to face a silent dilemma. How to remain radical without becoming predictable. When the public already expects the absurd, the shock loses its power. It's like someone who always lives on the edge. At some point, the extreme becomes routine. The real challenge now is not to create something stranger, but to create something that still provokes reflection. For bizarre luxury to survive, it needs to evolve from visual provocation to intellectual provocation. At this point, the brand begins to play with more subtle layers. Less noise, more concept. Less scandal, more symbolism. Something similar to when a person matures and realizes they no longer need to prove anything all the time. Power ceases to reside in shouting and begins to dwell in silence. If we observe carefully, we can already notice more restrained, almost strategic movements, like someone taking a step back to see the entire board before the next move. The paradox is clear. The more the brand has taught the public to accept the strange, the more it needs to reinvent the very meaning of strangeness. The future lies not in shocking more, but in surprising better. And this requires something rare in today's market: patience, vision, and the courage to change again when everyone thinks they've already figured out the game. It is precisely here that the story ceases to be about fashion and becomes about strategy, timing, and mastery of narrative. What does bizarre luxury teach us about choices, power, and identity? Ultimately, the story of Balenciaga isn't about expensive clothes, exaggerated silhouettes, or controversial campaigns. It's about the courage to stand by a vision when no one understands it. It's about choosing a path that seems strange now, but builds authority later. The big question that remains is, how many times have you stopped yourself from pursuing an idea, a project, or even a way of being because you were afraid of seeming too strange to others? Think honestly. Where are you still seeking approval instead of identity? Where are you choosing comfort when discomfort could take you further? Just like in strange luxury. In real life, those who stand out aren't the ones who please, but those who sustain themselves. Those who accept that not everyone will understand. And that's okay. The game changes when you stop trying to be accepted and start being respected. And now I challenge you. What would you do differently if you didn't have to please anyone? What decision would you postpone less? What version of yourself would you stand by with more conviction? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, then this channel is exactly the place for you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and continue learning about power, strategy, identity, and choices that build long-term respect.